Beatrice Harlow clutched the worn letter in her trembling hands as the stagecoach bounced along the dusty trail towards Silver Creek, Wyoming territory. 1878 had been a year of desperate decisions, and becoming a mail-order bride ranked at the top of her list. The harsh reality of her situation had settled over her during the grueling 2-week journey from Boston. At 22 years old, with no family, no prospects, and standing at a towering 5 feet 11 inches, she had exhausted her options in the east. "Almost there, miss," the driver called back. "Silver Creek's just beyond that ridge." Beatrice smoothed her travel-worn skirt and touched her carefully pinned chestnut hair. She had exchanged dozens of letters with Mr. Howard Duncan, a rancher seeking a wife. Their correspondence had been pleasant enough, though she had carefully avoided mentioning her unusual height. It wasn't exactly a lie. She reasoned he'd never directly asked, and she'd been desperate for a fresh start. The stagecoach rolled into town, the wooden buildings of Silver Creek appearing like a mirage against the vast Wyoming landscape. Dust swirled around the coach as it came to a stop before the town's only hotel. "Silver Creek," the driver announced. "End of the line." Beatrice gathered her 2 small bags, heart pounding as she peered through the window. A small crowd had gathered, and among them stood a short, balding man in his 40s, holding a bunch of wilted wildflowers. Howard Duncan, her future husband. With as much dignity as she could muster, Beatrice stepped down from the coach. The moment her boots hit the dirt, a hush fell over the onlookers. She stood to her full height, towering over most of the men present, including Howard Duncan, whose eyes widened in shock. "Miss Harlow?" he asked, his voice thin with disbelief. "Yes, Mr. Duncan. It's a pleasure to finally meet you," she said, extending her hand. Howard's gaze traveled slowly upward, taking in her imposing height. The wildflowers in his hand drooped lower. "You didn't mention you were quite so tall," he said, not taking her offered hand. "I don't recall you asking, sir," she replied, struggling to keep her voice steady. A woman in the crowd tittered. Someone whispered loud enough for Beatrice to hear. "She's taller than most men in town." Howard's face flushed red. "This won't do at all," he muttered. "I can't have a wife who stands half a head taller than me. What would people say?" Beatrice felt the blood drain from her face. "Mr. Duncan, surely after our correspondence, I'm sorry, Miss Harlow, but this simply won't work." He thrust the wilted flowers into her hands. "I'll pay for your room tonight, but tomorrow you should take the stage back east. Good day." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Beatrice standing alone in the dusty street, her few possessions at her feet and the curious, pitying eyes of strangers upon her. "Well now, isn't that something?" an older woman clucked. "Poor thing came all this way." "Duncan's a fool," someone else remarked. Beatrice stood frozen, humiliation washing over her. She had spent nearly every penny she had on the journey west. There would be no going back. "Miss? Your room key." The hotel clerk had approached, holding out a brass key. "Mr. Duncan settled up for tonight." One night. She had one night to figure out what to do with the rest of her life. "Thank you," she managed, taking the key with a steady hand despite her inner turmoil. As the crowd dispersed, she felt a presence beside her. A deep voice spoke. "Need help with those bags, madam?" Beatrice turned to find herself looking directly into a pair of striking blue eyes. Not up at them, as she was accustomed to doing with men, but straight across. The man before her stood at least 6 feet 3 inches tall, broad-shouldered in a worn leather vest over a faded blue shirt. His face was sun-weathered but handsome, with a strong jaw partially covered by a neatly trimmed beard. "I can manage, thank you," she said stiffly, pride still smarting. "I don't doubt it," he replied with a slight smile. "But it would be my pleasure all the same." Before she could protest further, he picked up both her bags. "Mitch Reed," he introduced himself. "Most folks call me Mitch." "Beatrice Harlow," she replied, following him toward the hotel entrance. "I know who you are, Miss Harlow," he said, his voice dropping lower. "And if you'll pardon my saying so, Howard Duncan is the biggest fool in the Wyoming territory." He glanced back at her, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Perfect," he said simply, before continuing toward the hotel. Beatrice wasn't sure if he was referring to her height or something else entirely. But for the first time since stepping off the stagecoach, she felt a flicker of hope. The hotel room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, washstand, and a window overlooking the main street. Mitchell Reed set her bags down by the door. "Thank you, Mr. Reed," Beatrice said formally. "Mitch," he corrected. "And you're welcome, Miss Harlow." He hesitated at the door. "I imagine you're wondering what comes next." Beatrice sank onto the edge of the bed. "I haven't the faintest idea. I've spent nearly everything I had to come here." Mitch leaned against the doorframe. "Silver Creek could use a schoolteacher. I'm not a trained teacher. Can you read and write?" "Of course. That puts you ahead of half the folks here." His expression softened. "Give it some thought. In the meantime, I'd be honored if you'd join me for supper this evening." 7 o'clock at the Silverbuck restaurant across the street. Before she could respond, he tipped his hat and was gone, closing the door behind him. Alone, Beatrice finally allowed her composure to crack. Hot tears spilled down her cheeks as the enormity of her situation hit her. She had gambled everything on this new life, only to be rejected within minutes of arrival. After allowing herself a good cry, she washed her face with cold water from the pitcher on the washstand. Pragmatism had always been her strongest trait. She would not be defeated so easily. Reaching into her bag, she pulled out her last clean dress, a deep green cotton that brought out the flecks of gold in her hazel eyes. If she was to meet Mr. Reed for dinner, she would at least look presentable. As 7 o'clock approached, Beatrice made her way downstairs. The hotel lobby was busy with travelers and locals alike, many of whom stared openly at her. She held her head high, refusing to shrink or slouch as she had so often done back east. Outside, the evening air had cooled, and Silver Creek looked almost picturesque in the golden light of sunset. The Silverbuck restaurant was easy to spot, with its painted sign and oil lamps glowing in the windows. Mitch was waiting outside, and Beatrice was struck again by his height. He had changed into a clean white shirt and dark vest, his hair still damp from washing. "Miss Harlow," he said, his smile genuine. "I'm glad you came." "Thank you for the invitation, Mr. Reed." "Mitch," she corrected herself. He offered his arm, and she took it, noting how their heights matched perfectly side by side. Inside, the restaurant was warm and inviting, with checkered tablecloths and the aroma of home cooking. The waitress led them to a corner table, and Beatrice couldn't help but notice the curious glances they received. Mitch seemed oblivious, or perhaps simply unconcerned. "The stew here is excellent," he recommended after they were seated. "Then stew it shall be," she agreed. Over dinner, Beatrice learned that Mitchell Reed owned one of the largest cattle ranches in the territory, inherited from his father 5 years earlier. He'd been born in Missouri, but had spent most of his life in Wyoming. "What about you?" he asked. "What brings a Boston lady to Silver Creek besides Howard Duncan's misguided invitation?" Beatrice hesitated, then decided honesty was best. "Necessity, primarily. My parents died of influenza 2 years ago. I worked as a seamstress, but it wasn't enough to live on. The opportunity to come west seemed hopeful." "And your height? Has it always been a difficulty?" She stiffened. "It's not something I care to discuss over dinner." "My apologies," he said immediately. "That was poorly phrased." "I only meant," he paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "What I mean to say is, I find it refreshing. Most women barely reach my shoulder. Most men expect women to be delicate flowers they can protect," she countered. "And you don't need protecting?" There was a hint of amusement in his voice. "I've managed this far." "Indeed you have." He studied her face. "But everyone needs help sometimes, Miss Harlow. Even tall, independent Boston ladies." The waitress brought their stew and fresh bread, and they ate in companionable silence for a few minutes. "About that teaching position," Mitch said eventually. "Our last schoolteacher left 2 months ago to get married. The children have been running wild ever since. The town council would be mighty grateful to have someone take over." "I have no formal training," she reminded him. "The council meets tomorrow morning. Come with me, meet them, see the schoolhouse. What have you got to lose?" What indeed, she thought. Her options were limited to non-existent. "Very well," she agreed. "I'll meet with them." By the time dinner was finished, Beatrice found herself genuinely enjoying Mitch's company. He was intelligent, well-spoken, and treated her with a respect she rarely experienced from men. "May I walk you back to the hotel?" he asked as they stepped outside into the cool night air. It's just across the street, Mr. Reed. Humor me, he said with a smile. At the hotel entrance, he took her hand. Until tomorrow, Miss Harlow. I'll call for you at 9. Good night, Mitch. And, thank you. For dinner? It was my pleasure. For not making me feel like a curiosity. His expression softened. Beatrice, he said, using her first name for the first time. This town is full of curious things. A woman who stands eye to eye with me isn't one of them. With that, he tipped his hat and walked away, leaving Beatrice to wonder if perhaps her misfortune with Howard Duncan had been a blessing in disguise. The following morning, Beatrice dressed in her most respectable attire, a navy blue skirt and white shirtwaist with a matching jacket. She pinned her hair in a simple but neat style, hoping to appear both capable and trustworthy. At precisely 9 o'clock, there was a knock at her door. Mitch stood waiting, looking every inch the successful rancher in a clean shirt, vest, and a string tie. Good morning, Miss Harlow, he greeted her. Ready to meet the town council? As ready as I'll ever be, she replied, closing her door behind her. They walked through town, Mitch occasionally tipping his hat to passers-by and introducing Beatrice. To her surprise, most people seemed genuinely welcoming, though she couldn't help noticing many curious glances at her height. The town hall was a modest building near the center of Silver Creek. Inside, 5 men sat around a large table, all looking up as Mitch and Beatrice entered. Gentlemen, Mitch announced, may I present Miss Beatrice Harlow. Miss Harlow, the Silver Creek Town Council. Mayor Williams, a portly man with an impressive mustache, stood to greet her. Miss Harlow, Mitch here tells us you might be interested in the teaching position. I would certainly like to discuss the possibility, she replied carefully. For the next hour, the council questioned her about her education, her experience with children, and her knowledge of various subjects. Beatrice answered honestly, admitting her lack of formal training, but emphasizing her strong education and quick learning ability. Can you handle discipline? Asked Mr. Finch, the general store owner. Some of these boys are quite rowdy. Beatrice straightened to her full height. Mr. Finch, I assure you I am more than capable of maintaining order in a classroom. Several of the men chuckled, and Mayor Williams nodded approvingly. Well, Miss Harlow, I believe we've heard enough. Would you mind stepping outside while we deliberate? Mitch accompanied her to the porch, where they sat on a wooden bench. You impressed them, he said confidently. How can you be sure? I've known these men for years. They're desperate for a teacher, and you're clearly educated and capable. Before she could respond, the door opened, and Mayor Williams beckoned them back inside. Miss Harlow, he announced, the council has voted unanimously to offer you the position of schoolteacher for Silver Creek. The salary is $30 a month, with housing provided in the rooms above the schoolhouse. Term begins next Monday. Do you accept? Relief washed over Beatrice. Yes, Mr. Mayor. I accept, and I thank you for this opportunity. Excellent. Mayor Williams beamed. Mitch, would you be kind enough to show Miss Harlow the schoolhouse? It would be my pleasure, Mitch replied, offering Beatrice his arm once more. The schoolhouse stood at the edge of town, a simple white building with large windows and a small bell tower. Inside was one large room with rows of desks, a teacher's desk at the front, and a blackboard covering one wall. It's not fancy, Mitch said, but it's solid. The upstairs apartment has 2 rooms, a bedroom, and a sitting room with a small kitchen area. They climbed the narrow stairs to find a modest but clean living space. The sitting room contained a small stove, a table with 2 chairs, and a worn but comfortable-looking armchair. Through a doorway, Beatrice could see a narrow bed and a dresser in the bedroom. It's perfect, she breathed, overwhelmed by the sudden turn in her fortunes. I'm glad you think so, Mitch said, watching her with a gentle expression. The town's seamstress, Mrs. Peterson, left some curtains and linens, and the general store can provide whatever else you need to get settled. Beatrice turned to him, emotion welling up. Why are you helping me, Mr. Reed? You don't know me. Mitch stepped closer, his blue eyes serious. Sometimes a person just knows when something's right, Miss Harlow. The moment I saw you standing in that street, head high despite Duncan's foolishness, I knew you belonged here in Silver Creek. He paused. And perhaps I know what it's like to stand out in a crowd. For the first time in years, Beatrice didn't feel self-conscious about her height. Standing eye to eye with Mitch Reed, She felt something she hadn't experienced in a very long time. She felt right. "Thank you," she said simply. "No need for thanks. Silver Creek just gained an excellent teacher, and He hesitated. "I gained a new friend, I hope." "Yes," she replied softly. "A friend." The weekend passed in a flurry of activity as Beatrice prepared for her first day of teaching. Mitch helped her move her few belongings from the hotel to the schoolhouse apartment, while several townswomen stopped by with welcome gifts, baked goods, preserves, and even a hand-stitched quilt from the quilting circle. Mrs. Peterson, the seamstress, visited with fabric samples for new dresses. "You'll need proper teaching clothes," she insisted. "And don't you worry about your height, dear. I've dressed women of all sizes." By Sunday evening, Beatrice stood in her classroom, reviewing her lesson plans one last time. She had organized the students by age and ability based on the school records, prepared reading exercises and arithmetic problems, and even found some maps and history books on the bookshelf. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Mitch stood there, hat in hand, holding a small package. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," he said. "I wanted to wish you luck for tomorrow." "Not at all. Come in," she invited, suddenly conscious of her disheveled appearance after hours of preparation. "I brought you something." He handed her the package, wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. "A small token for your first day." Beatrice untied the string and unwrapped the paper to reveal a beautiful fountain pen and a leather-bound journal. "Oh, Mitch, they're lovely," she said, genuinely touched. "Every teacher needs proper writing implements," he said with a smile. "And I thought you might want to record your experiences here. Your new beginning." "Thank you. Truly." She placed the gifts on her desk. "Would you like some tea? It's the least I can offer." They sat in her small apartment, drinking tea and talking about the town, the children she would be teaching, and their own childhoods. As the evening grew late, Beatrice found herself more relaxed in Mitch's company than she had been with anyone in years. "I should go," he said eventually, standing reluctantly. "You need your rest before tomorrow." At the door, he hesitated. "Beatrice, would you do me the honor of accompanying me to the Founders' Day dance next Saturday? The whole town will be there." "A dance?" she echoed, old insecurities rising. "I don't know." "Just think about it," he said gently. "No pressure." After he left, Beatrice sat in her armchair, thinking about his invitation. Back east, dances had been exercises in humiliation. She had often been taller than potential partners, leading to awkward comments and frequent wallflower status. But dancing with Mitch would be different. They matched perfectly in height. Still, she was new in town. People were just beginning to accept her. Would attending a dance with one of Silver Creek's most eligible bachelors create unwanted gossip? Putting these thoughts aside, she prepared for bed. Tomorrow would be her first day as Silver Creek schoolteacher, and she needed to focus on making a good impression. Monday morning dawned bright and clear. Beatrice dressed in one of her best outfits, had a quick breakfast, and went downstairs to the classroom. At 8 o'clock, she rang the school bell, its clear tone echoing across town. Children began arriving, some accompanied by parents curious to meet the new teacher. Beatrice stood at the door, greeting each student by name based on the records she had studied. "Good morning, Thomas." "Hello, Sarah." "Welcome, Billy." By 8:30, 27 students ranging from 6 to 16 years of age were seated at their desks, watching her with expressions varying from curiosity to wariness. "Good morning, children," she began, her voice clear and confident. "I am Miss Harlow, your new teacher. I look forward to getting to know each of you and helping you learn." A small boy in the front row raised his hand. "Miss Harlow, are you really from Boston?" "Yes, I am." "And are you really as tall as Mr. Reed?" asked an older girl, giggling with her friends. Beatrice smiled patiently. "Yes, I am quite tall." "Now, shall we begin with roll call?" The morning progressed smoothly for the most part, though there were certainly challenges. Billy Thompson, a freckle-faced 12-year-old, seemed determined to test her authority with whispered comments and small disruptions. The older boys were initially dismissive, clearly doubting a woman's ability to teach them anything useful. By lunchtime, Beatrice had asserted her authority without raising her voice once. She had separated troublemakers, engaged the reluctant learners with challenging questions, and captivated the younger children with a lively reading from Robinson Crusoe. As the children ate their packed lunches in the schoolyard, Mayor Williams stopped by. "How's the first day going, Miss Harlow?" "Quite well, thank you, Mayor." "Glad to hear it. The whole town's pulling for you, you know." After lunch, she had the older students work on essays while she taught the younger ones basic arithmetic. By the time the final bell rang at 4 o'clock, Beatrice was exhausted but exhilarated. She had survived her first day as a teacher. As the last children filtered out, Billy Thompson lingered at her desk. "Miss Harlow." "Yes, Billy. That's some you showed us, with the carrying over. Could you show me again?" "I didn't quite get it." Hiding her surprise at his request for help, Beatrice spent the next 15 minutes patiently explaining the concept until Billy's face lit up with understanding. "Thanks, Miss Harlow," he called as he dashed out the door. Alone at last, Beatrice sank into her chair with a sigh of relief. The day had gone better than she had dared hope. A knock at the open door made her look up. Mitch stood there, a smile on his face. "I hear congratulations are in order," he said. "Word around town is that our new schoolteacher is a natural." "News travels fast," she observed, returning his smile. "It's Silver Creek. Everyone knows everything by supper time." He entered the classroom, glancing around appreciatively at the orderly desks and the lessons written neatly on the blackboard. "I thought you might be too tired to cook tonight. Mrs. Miller at the cafe packed a basket for you." Only then did Beatrice notice the covered basket he carried. "That's incredibly thoughtful. Thank you." "There's enough for two," he said casually. "If you'd like company." She should decline, Beatrice thought. It wouldn't be proper to dine alone with a man in her apartment. But propriety seemed less important than it once had, and she was genuinely hungry and tired. "I would like that," she decided. "Let me just tidy up here first." They ate at her small table upstairs, sharing roast chicken, biscuits, and apple pie while Beatrice recounted her first day of teaching. "Billy Thompson actually asked for help with arithmetic," she concluded. "The same boy who spent the morning trying to disrupt my class." "That's a victory," Mitch agreed. "Billy's a good kid at heart, just needs direction. His pa was killed in a mining accident last year." As they finished eating, Mitch helped her clear the dishes. Their hands brushed as he handed her a plate, and Beatrice felt a flutter in her stomach at the contact. "Have you thought about the dance?" he asked, his voice casual, but his eyes intent. Beatrice hesitated. "I'm not much of a dancer, Mitch." "Neither am I," he confessed. "But I'd like to try. With you." Their eyes met, and for a moment, Beatrice forgot all the reasons why getting involved with anyone in Silver Creek might be complicated. She forgot Howard Duncan's rejection and years of feeling awkward and out of place. "Yes," she said finally. "I'd like that too." His smile was worth any potential gossip or complications. "Saturday at 7, then," he said. "I'll come by to escort you." After he left, Beatrice opened the new journal he had given her and began to write. "Today was my first day as a teacher," she wrote. "I think I may have found where I belong." The rest of the week passed in a blur of lessons, getting to know her students, and settling into life in Silver Creek. Each day became a little easier as the children adjusted to her teaching style, and she learned their individual strengths and challenges. The community continued to welcome her. Mrs. Peterson delivered 2 new dresses, perfectly tailored to her height. Mr. Finch at the general store extended her credit until her first month's salary. And nearly every day, Mitch found some reason to stop by the schoolhouse delivering firewood, fixing a loose shutter, or simply bringing her wildflowers to brighten up the classroom. By Saturday, Beatrice had to admit to herself that she was falling for Mitch Reed. His kindness, his easy acceptance of her height, his gentle humor all combined to make him unlike any man she had ever known. As evening approached, she prepared for the dance with both excitement and trepidation. Mrs. Peterson had created a special dress for the occasion, a deep burgundy with delicate lace trim that complemented Beatrice's chestnut hair and fair skin. Standing before the small mirror in her bedroom, Beatrice hardly recognized herself. For the first time in her adult life, she allowed herself to stand fully straight, embracing her height rather than trying to minimize it. At precisely 7 o'clock, there was a knock at her door. Mitch stood on the landing, looking handsome in a dark suit, his usual cowboy hat replaced by neatly combed hair. His eyes widened appreciatively as he took in her appearance. "Miss Harlow, you look absolutely beautiful." "Thank you," she replied, feeling a blush rise in her cheeks. "You look quite handsome yourself." He offered his arm. shall we? The town hall had been transformed for the Founders' Day celebration. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting a warm glow over the wooden floor cleared for dancing. A small band played in one corner, and tables laden with food and drink lined the walls. As they entered, Beatrice felt the now familiar stares of the townspeople, but this time they seemed more curious than judgmental. Several people greeted them warmly, and Mayor Williams hurried over to welcome them. "Miss Harlow, Mitchell, so glad you could join us. Everyone's been talking about our new school teacher." "All good things, I hope," Beatrice said with a smile. "Indeed. Mrs. Thompson was just telling me how Billy actually did his arithmetic homework last night." Voluntarily, Beatrice laughed. "He's a bright boy when he applies himself." The mayor moved on to greet other arrivals, and Mitch led Beatrice toward the refreshment table. "Punch." "Yes, please." As they sipped their drinks, Beatrice observed the dancers. Couples of all ages whirled around the floor to a lively reel, their faces flushed with exertion and enjoyment. "Would you care to dance?" Mitch asked as the music changed to a slower waltz. Beatrice hesitated. "I should warn you, I'm not very practiced." "That makes two of us," he said with a grin. "We'll muddle through together." He led her onto the dance floor, placing one hand respectfully at her waist while taking her hand with the other. They began to move in time with the music, a bit awkwardly at first, but soon finding their rhythm. "See? Not so terrible," Mitch said softly. "No, not terrible at all," she agreed, amazed at how natural it felt to dance with a partner who matched her height. As they turned around the floor, Beatrice noticed Howard Duncan watching from the sidelines, his expression a mixture of surprise and what might have been regret. She nodded politely in his direction, but felt no lingering hurt from his rejection. How quickly things had changed. The evening continued pleasantly, with Beatrice dancing not only with Mitch, but also with Mayor Williams and several other respectable gentlemen of the town. Between dances, she chatted with the mothers of her students and was introduced to what seemed like half the county. During a break in the music, Mitch brought her a plate of food and guided her to a quiet corner. "Having a good time?" he asked. "Better than I expected," she admitted. "Everyone has been very kind." "They see what I saw right away," he said, his voice dropping lower. "A remarkable woman who belongs here." Their eyes met, and Beatrice felt that flutter in her stomach again, stronger this time. "Mitch, She was interrupted by a commotion at the entrance. A man staggered in, his clothes torn and bloody. "Raiders," he gasped. "Attacking the Morrison place. They've set fire to the barn." Instantly, the festive mood evaporated. Men rushed for their weapons, and women gathered children close. Mitch stood immediately. "Beatrice, stay here with the women and children," he instructed, his voice firm. "Be careful," she urged, suddenly afraid. He squeezed her hand briefly before joining the group of men organizing themselves to ride out to the Morrison ranch. For the next several hours, the town hall became a center of anxious waiting. Women prepared bandages and heated water, while older men who couldn't join the riders kept watch around the town. Beatrice found herself comforting frightened children, including several of her students. She organized games to distract them and spoke soothingly to worried mothers. It was well past midnight when the riders began returning. Some carried wounded men, while others looked exhausted but relieved. Beatrice scanned the returning group anxiously, looking for Mitch. When she finally spotted him, her relief was so intense that her knees nearly buckled. He was helping another man dismount, his shirt torn and smudged with soot, but otherwise unharmed. Once the injured were being tended to, Mitch made his way to her side. "The Morrisons are safe," he reported. "The raiders were driven off, but they managed to burn the barn and steal some cattle before we arrived." "Thank God you're all right," Beatrice said, resisting the urge to throw her arms around him in public. "I'm fine," he assured her. "Just tired and in need of a bath." Mayor Williams approached them. "Mitchell, thank you for your leadership tonight. Miss Harlow, your calm presence was a blessing to the women and children." "I did very little," she demurred. "Nonsense. Several mothers commented on how you kept the children from panicking." The mayor patted Mitch's shoulder. "Get some rest, both of you. We'll sort everything else out tomorrow." As the hall emptied, Mitch walked Beatrice back to the schoolhouse, both of them too tired for much conversation. At her door, he took her hand. "I'm sorry our evening was cut short," he said. There's nothing to apologize for. You did what needed to be done. He studied her face in the moonlight. You're quite something, Beatrice Harlow. As are you, Mitch Reed. For a moment, she thought he might kiss her, but he simply squeezed her hand and stepped back. Good night, Beatrice. Sleep well. Good night, Mitch. Inside her apartment, Beatrice sank onto her bed, still in her beautiful dress, emotions churning. The evening had been a whirlwind of joy and fear, connection and separation. One thing was clear. Her feelings for Mitch had grown stronger, deeper, and more certain. Sunday was a day of recovery for Silver Creek. Church service was subdued, with prayers offered for the Morrisons and thanks given that no lives had been lost. Afterward, Beatrice joined a group of women preparing meals to send out to the Morrison ranch, where men were already gathering to rebuild the barn. Mitch stopped by briefly before heading out to help with the rebuilding. Will you be all right here? He asked. Of course. Go help the Morrisons. They need you more than I do right now. He studied her face. I'll come by this evening, if that's all right. I'll have supper waiting, she promised. True to his word, Mitch arrived just after sunset, looking exhausted but satisfied. We got the frame up, he reported as he washed his hands at her sink. Another day or two and they'll have a new barn. Over a simple meal of stew and biscuits, he told her about the raiders, a gang that had been troubling the territory for months, preying on isolated homesteads. The Marshal in Cheyenne has been tracking them, but they're elusive, he explained. This is the closest they've come to town. Do you think they'll return? Not likely. They prefer easier targets, and they know we're on alert now. He reached across the table to take her hand. Don't worry, Beatrice. You're safe here. His touch was warm and reassuring. I'm not afraid, she told him truthfully. Not when I'm with you. Their eyes met, and something shifted between them. Mitch stood, gently pulling her to her feet. Standing face to face, their heights perfectly matched, he slowly raised a hand to her cheek. Beatrice, he said softly, I know you've only been in Silver Creek a short time, but I need you to know that a loud knocking at the schoolhouse door below interrupted him. They both froze, then Mitch sighed. I'd better see who that is. Moments later, he returned with Mayor Williams, who looked apologetic. I'm sorry to interrupt your evening, but we've just received word that the Marshal is arriving tomorrow with a posse. He's tracking those raiders, and he needs information from those of us who rode out last night. Of course, Mitch agreed. What time? First thing in the morning at the town hall. The mayor nodded to Beatrice. My apologies again, Miss Harlow. After the mayor left, the intimate moment had passed. Mitch helped Beatrice clear the dishes, then reluctantly prepared to leave. What were you going to say? She asked as they stood at her door. Before the mayor arrived. Mitch smiled softly. It'll keep until tomorrow. He took her hand and raised it to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Good night, Beatrice. The next morning, Beatrice rose early to prepare for school. As she rang the bell at 8 o'clock, she noticed unusual activity around the town hall, horses hitched outside, and men gathering. Her students were full of excitement about the Marshal's arrival and the raiders, making it challenging to focus their attention on lessons. Billy Thompson had actual information to share, as his older brother had been among the riders. My brother says Mr. Reed shot one of the raiders, he announced proudly. Right off his horse. Billy, that's enough, Beatrice said firmly. Open your readers to page 23. At lunchtime, Beatrice stepped outside to supervise the children in the schoolyard. She noticed a group of men leaving the town hall, Mitch among them. He spotted her and walked over, tipping his hat politely due to the presence of the children. How's the meeting going? She asked. The Marshal has a good lead on the raiders' hideout. He's gathering volunteers to ride out tomorrow. And you're going? She guessed, noting his determined expression. I have to, Beatrice. These men threatened our community. She nodded, understanding but concerned. When will you leave? Dawn tomorrow. It might be a few days before we return. He glanced at the playing children, then back to her. I'll come by this evening to say a proper goodbye. I'll be waiting, she promised. The afternoon dragged endlessly, her mind constantly wandering to thoughts of Mitch riding into danger. When the final bell rang and the children departed, Beatrice tried to distract herself with grading papers, but her concentration was lacking. As promised, Mitch arrived that evening, dressed in his everyday clothes rather than the soot-stained attire from the night before. I can't stay long, he apologized. We're still making preparations. I understand. Would you like some coffee at least? They sat at her small table, an awkward tension between them that hadn't existed before. Beatrice, Mitch began seriously. Before I go, I need to tell you what I started to say last night. She held her breath, her heart pounding. I know it's fast, maybe too fast, but life out here doesn't always give us the luxury of time. He reached across the table and took both her hands in his. From the moment I saw you standing in that street, so tall and proud despite Duncan's foolishness, I knew you were special. These past weeks have only confirmed what my heart knew immediately. Mitch, please, let me finish. His blue eyes were intense. I'm falling in love with you, Beatrice Harlow. I think I started falling the moment I looked up and thought, perfect. And before I ride out tomorrow, I needed you to know that. Beatrice felt tears spring to her eyes. I'm falling in love with you too, she whispered. But you're right, it is fast. We've known each other less than 2 weeks. Does that matter? He asked gently. Does it change how we feel? She shook her head. No, but it frightens me. What does? The intensity of it. And now you're riding into danger, and She couldn't finish the thought. Mitch stood and pulled her to her feet, drawing her into his arms. I will come back to you, he promised. You have my word. Looking down slightly into her eyes, he lowered his head and kissed her. It was gentle at first, then deepened as Beatrice responded, her arms sliding around his neck. When they finally parted, both were breathless. Mitch rested his forehead against hers. Now I definitely have something to come back for, he murmured. Please be careful, she whispered. I will. He kissed her once more, briefly, then stepped back. I should go. Dawn comes early. At the door, he turned back. Beatrice, when I return, we have much to discuss. Yes, she agreed, her heart both full and afraid. We do. After he left, Beatrice barely slept, her mind filled with worry and hope in equal measure. By morning, she was exhausted but determined to carry on with her duties. The children would need stability, especially with the town's men riding out to confront danger. As she walked to the schoolhouse, she saw the posse gathering in the pre-dawn light. Nearly 20 men, including Mitch, the marshal, and many fathers of her students, were checking weapons and supplies. Beatrice stayed back, not wanting to intrude or to distract Mitch from his focus. Just before they rode out, Mitch looked up and saw her standing there. He touched his hat in salute, his eyes conveying what words could not in such a public setting. She nodded in response, trying to communicate her own feelings with that simple gesture. Then they were gone, hoofbeats fading into the distance as Beatrice rang the school bell to begin another day. The following days were among the hardest Beatrice had ever experienced. Worry for Mitch consumed her thoughts, though she did her best to hide it from her students. Many of the children were equally concerned about their own fathers, making classroom management particularly challenging. The women of Silver Creek rallied together, taking turns watching each other's children and sharing meals. Beatrice found herself included in this circle of support, invited to evening gatherings where they sewed, cooked, and provided comfort to one another. On the third evening, as Beatrice sat with Mrs. Thompson and several other women mending clothes, Mrs. Peterson asked the question that had clearly been on many minds. So, Miss Harlow, you and Mitchell Reed seem quite close. Beatrice felt herself blush. Mr. Reed has been very kind to me since my arrival. Kind, yes, Mrs. Thompson said with a knowing smile. And something more, I'd wager. Now, ladies, Mrs. Miller interjected. Let's not embarrass our teacher. Though I must say, you two make a handsome couple. The perfect height for each other, Mrs. Peterson added with a wink. Not like that fool Howard Duncan, who couldn't see past his own pride. Howard's been kicking himself ever since the dance, Mrs. Miller confided. Seeing you with Mitch, looking so beautiful and happy, well, let's just say regret is a bitter pill. Beatrice couldn't help but smile at that, though she quickly composed herself. Mr. Duncan made his choice, and I harbor no ill will. Very gracious of you, Mrs. Thompson approved. But tell us true, Miss Harlow, are there wedding bells in your future? Martha, Mrs. Peterson scolded. Such a forward question. It's all right, Beatrice assured them, though her cheeks burned hotter. Mr. Reed and I are exploring our feelings. It's still very new, but not unwelcome. Mrs. Miller pressed gently. Beatrice thought of Mitch's kiss, the way he looked at her, as if she were the most precious thing in his world. No, she admitted softly. Not unwelcome at all. The women exchanged satisfied glances, and the conversation turned to other matters. But Beatrice noticed a shift in their treatment of her. She was no longer just the new schoolteacher, but potentially the future Mrs. Mitchell Reed, a position that apparently carried significant respect in Silver Creek. On the morning of the 5th day, Beatrice was teaching arithmetic to the younger children when a commotion outside drew her attention. Looking through the window, she saw riders approaching the posse returning. "Children," she said, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Please continue with your sums. I need to step outside for a moment." On the schoolhouse steps, she scanned the approaching group anxiously. The men looked tired and dusty, but they rode with the straight backs of those returning victorious. Her eyes searched for Mitch, panic rising when she couldn't immediately spot him. Then the group shifted, and there he was, riding beside the marshal. Relief flooded through her so powerfully that she gripped the railing for support. As the riders reached the town center, families poured out of buildings to greet them. Beatrice forced herself to remain at the schoolhouse, watching as Mitch dismounted and spoke briefly with the marshal before looking in her direction. Their eyes met across the distance, and even from afar, she could see his face light up. He said something to the marshal, who nodded, then began walking purposefully toward the schoolhouse. Beatrice's heart pounded as he approached. He looked exhausted, with several days' growth of beard and dust covering his clothes. But to her, he had never looked more handsome. "Miss Harlow." He greeted her formally, aware of the watching townspeople. "Mr. Reed," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm relieved to see you safe." "We got them," he reported. "The marshal is taking the survivors to Cheyenne for trial." "Survivors?" A shadow crossed his face. 3 of the raiders were killed in the fight. "We lost one man, Jim Parker, from over by Eagle Creek. No one from Silver Creek was seriously hurt." "Thank God for that," she breathed. They stood in awkward silence, so much to say, but unable to speak freely in such a public setting. "I should let you get back to your students," Mitch said finally. "But Beatrice." He lowered his voice. "May I call on you this evening?" "Yes," she answered immediately. "Please do." He tipped his hat, his eyes conveying far more than his polite gesture, then turned and walked back toward the town center, where the marshal was addressing the gathering crowd. Somehow, Beatrice managed to maintain order in her classroom for the remainder of the day, though her mind was elsewhere. Several of her students whose fathers had returned wanted to share stories, and she allowed a brief discussion before firmly redirecting them to their lessons. When the final bell rang, she found herself rushing the children out, then hurrying upstairs to her apartment. She washed quickly, changed into a fresh dress, and tried to make herself presentable despite her trembling hands. Mitch arrived just after sunset, freshly bathed and shaved, wearing clean clothes. He stood somewhat uncertainly at her door, as if unsure of his welcome after nearly a week's absence. "Come in," she invited softly. Once inside, with the door closed behind them, all pretense of formality vanished. Mitch crossed the room in 2 strides and gathered her into his arms, holding her as if he'd never let go. "I missed you," he murmured into her hair. "Every mile, every minute." "I was so worried," she confessed, her face pressed against his shoulder, breathing in his clean, familiar scent. He pulled back slightly to look into her eyes, his hands framing her face. "I told you I'd come back." "I know," but he silenced her with a kiss, gentle at first but quickly deepening with the intensity of their pent-up emotions. Beatrice responded eagerly, her arms tightening around his neck as she pressed closer. When they finally parted, both breathless, Mitch rested his forehead against hers. "I've been thinking about doing that for 5 very long days," he admitted. "I've been thinking about it too," she whispered. He led her to the small sofa, keeping her hand in his as they sat close together. "The marshal offered me a deputy position," he said. "Based in Cheyenne." Beatrice felt her heart sink. "Cheyenne? But that's—" "I turned him down," Mitch interrupted with a smile. "My place is here in Silver Creek. My ranch, my friends." He raised her hand to his lips. "And the woman I love." "Love?" she echoed, her pulse quickening. "Yes, Beatrice. Love." His blue eyes were serious. "I know it's fast, and I'm probably breaking all sorts of proper courting rules. But those days tracking the raiders made one thing absolutely clear. Life is too short and too uncertain to waste time when you know what you want. And what do you want? She asked softly. You, he said simply. By my side, as my wife, if you'll have me. Beatrice stared at him, momentarily speechless. Mitch, we've known each other less than 3 weeks. Does that matter? Does it change how I feel about you, or how you feel about me? She shook her head slowly. No, but marriage is a serious commitment. I'm a serious man, he countered. And I'm seriously in love with you, Beatrice Harlow. What about my teaching? The school needs me. And you can continue teaching for as long as you wish. My ranch is only 2 miles from town, an easy ride each day. Beatrice fell silent, her mind whirling with the implications of his proposal. She had come to Silver Creek desperate for a new beginning, never imagining that within weeks she would be considering marriage to a man she had only just met. Yet in her heart, she knew that what she felt for Mitch was real and profound. You don't have to answer now, he said gently, seeing her internal struggle. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. She looked into his kind, patient face and suddenly knew with absolute certainty what her answer would be. I don't need more time, she said. I love you too, Mitch Reed. And yes, I will marry you. His face lit up with such joy that it took her breath away. You will. I will, she confirmed, laughing as he pulled her into another embrace. You've made me the happiest man in Wyoming territory, he declared before kissing her soundly. When they separated, Mitch reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. I've been carrying this for days, hoping you'd say yes. He opened the pouch and tipped a delicate gold ring with a small diamond into his palm. It was my mother's. Beatrice gasped softly as he slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. It's beautiful, Mitch. She would have loved you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Almost as much as I do. They spent the rest of the evening making plans, talking about their future together. Mitch suggested a short engagement, 2 weeks, maybe 3, while Beatrice advocated for something slightly longer to give them time to prepare properly. The school term ends in 6 weeks, she pointed out. That would be a natural time for a wedding, and it would give us time to ready your ranch for both of us. Our ranch, he corrected gently. And 6 weeks sounds reasonable, if that's what you want. Though I warn you, it will feel like an eternity. They eventually agreed on 5 weeks, with the wedding to take place on the Saturday after the school term ended. Mitch would announce their engagement to the town council the following day, while Beatrice would speak with the school board about her continued employment after marriage. When Mitch finally left that night, after many more kisses and whispered plans, Beatrice stood at her window, watching him walk through the moonlit street. Her heart felt so full it might burst. She had come to Wyoming as a mail-order bride, rejected within minutes of her arrival for being too tall. Now, less than a month later, she was engaged to marry a man who saw her height as an asset rather than a flaw, a man who looked at her and said perfect. The news of their engagement spread through Silver Creek like wildfire. By the time Beatrice rang the school bell the following morning, it seemed everyone in town knew. The children bombarded her with questions, which she deflected with firm reminders about the day's lessons, though she couldn't completely hide her smile. After school, women began stopping by with congratulations and offers of help with wedding preparations. Mrs. Peterson insisted on making her wedding dress, while Mrs. Miller volunteered her daughters to decorate the church. We're so pleased, Mayor Williams told her when he encountered her at the general store. Mitch is one of our finest citizens, and you've proven yourself a tremendous asset to our community. It's a perfect match. Even Howard Duncan approached her after church that Sunday, hat in hand, and looking uncomfortable. Miss Harlow, I owe you an apology, he said stiffly. My behavior upon your arrival was inexcusable. Water under the bridge, Mr. Duncan, she replied graciously. Everything worked out for the best. Indeed it did, he agreed, glancing to where Mitch stood talking with some of the ranchers. Reed is a lucky man. The weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a blur of activity. During the day, Beatrice taught her students, who were showing remarkable progress under her guidance. In the evenings and on weekends, she divided her time between wedding preparations and visiting the Reed Ranch with Mitch. The ranch house was substantial but in need of a woman's touch after years of bachelor living. Together, they made plans for improvements: new curtains, a larger kitchen garden, perhaps an addition to the house eventually for children. Children? Mitch had asked, his expression hopeful. Someday, Beatrice confirmed, blushing. I've always wanted a family. Our children will be tall, he predicted with a grin. Is that a problem? She challenged playfully. Not at all. He pulled her close. Tall is perfect. 4 days before the wedding, a letter arrived from Boston, a response to one Beatrice had sent weeks earlier to her former employer. Mrs. Winthrop had included a small packet of seeds from her famous garden as a wedding gift, along with news that confirmed Beatrice had made the right decision in coming west. The garment shop where she had worked had closed, leaving many seamstresses without employment. You see, Mitch said when she shared the news. You were meant to come here, meant to step off that stagecoach right when you did. Even though Mr. Duncan rejected me, she teased. Especially because of that, he insisted. His loss, my eternal gain. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, a perfect June morning. Mrs. Peterson and several other women helped Beatrice prepare in her schoolhouse apartment, dressing her in the beautiful gown of ivory silk with delicate lace trim that the seamstress had created. You look absolutely radiant, Mrs. Thompson declared, adjusting the simple veil. Like a queen, agreed Mrs. Miller, dabbing at her eyes. When they were finished, Beatrice stood before the mirror, hardly recognizing herself. The gown emphasized her height and slender figure, making her look elegant rather than awkward. For perhaps the first time in her life, she felt truly beautiful. Mayor Williams had offered to escort her to the church, taking the place of the father she had lost. He arrived precisely on time, his eyes widening as she descended the schoolhouse stairs. My word, Miss Harlow, he said. Mitchell is going to be struck speechless. The church was filled to capacity, with nearly everyone in Silver Creek and many from surrounding ranches in attendance. As the small organ began to play and Beatrice walked down the aisle on the mayor's arm, she had eyes only for Mitch, who stood waiting at the altar. His face as he watched her approach was everything she could have hoped for: love, admiration, and what looked like disbelief at his good fortune shining in his eyes. When Mayor Williams placed her hand in Mitch's, she felt a sense of rightness, of coming home. You are so beautiful, Mitch whispered as they turned to face the minister. The ceremony was simple but deeply meaningful. They had written their own vows, promises to love, honor, and cherish each other through whatever life might bring. When they were pronounced husband and wife, and Mitch kissed her before the entire community, Beatrice felt her heart might burst with happiness. The celebration afterward was joyous, with music, dancing, and enough food to feed half the territory. Everyone wanted to congratulate them, to wish them well, to be part of their special day. As the sun began to set, they slipped away from the festivities, climbing into the buggy Mitch had decorated with flowers and ribbons for the occasion. Ready to go home, Mrs. Reed? He asked, his smile tender as he helped her into the seat. Yes, Mr. Reed, she replied, returning his smile. More than ready. As they drove toward their ranch, now Beatrice leaned against her husband's shoulder, marveling at the journey that had brought her here. From a desperate mail-order bride to a beloved teacher and wife, all in the span of 2 months. What are you thinking? Mitch asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. That I'm the luckiest woman in Wyoming territory, she answered honestly. That's funny, he said, his arm tightening around her. Because I was just thinking I'm the luckiest man. The ranch house glowed with lamplight as they approached, welcoming them home. Mitch had insisted on some mysterious preparations that morning, refusing to tell Beatrice what he had planned. As the buggy stopped before the house, he turned to her. Close your eyes, he instructed. Mitch, humor me, he said with a grin. It's our wedding day. She complied, keeping her eyes closed as he helped her down from the buggy. She heard the front door open, felt herself being guided inside, and detected the scent of flowers. All right, open them, Mitch said softly. Beatrice opened her eyes to find the main room transformed. Fresh wildflowers filled vases on every surface. Oil lamps cast a warm glow, and new curtains hung at the windows, curtains she recognized as being made from fabric she had admired at the general store weeks earlier. Mitch, it's beautiful, she breathed. But how did you? I had help, he admitted. Mrs. Peterson, Mrs. Miller, and half the women in town. They wanted to surprise you. She turned to him, overwhelmed with emotion. I love it. And I love you, Mitchell Reed. I love you too, Beatrice Reed. He replied, drawing her into his arms. More than I have words to express. As they shared a tender kiss in their home, Beatrice knew with absolute certainty that she had found where she belonged, not just in Silver Creek or on this ranch, but in the arms of a man who had looked up at her and said, perfect. 5 years later, Beatrice stood on the porch of the Reed Ranch, watching as Mitch taught their 4-year-old son, Matthew, to ride his pony. Their 2-year-old daughter, Margaret, sat on a blanket nearby, playing with wooden blocks. The ranch had prospered under their joint care. The house had been expanded twice, once to add a proper dining room and again for the children's bedrooms. The garden Beatrice had planted with Mrs. Winthrop's seeds now supplied much of their produce, and her preserves won ribbons at the county fair each year. She still taught at the Silver Creek School, though now only 3 days a week, with a young assistant teacher handling the other 2 days. Her students continued to excel, many going on to further education in Cheyenne or even back east. Silver Creek itself had grown, with a new church, a proper doctor's office, and even a small lending library that Beatrice had helped establish. Howard Duncan had eventually married a widow from Laramie, and they seemed happy enough, though Beatrice occasionally caught him watching her with a wistful expression. Mitch looked up from his lesson with Matthew and waved to her. Even after 5 years, the sight of him still made her heart beat faster. Their love had only deepened with time and the shared experiences of building a life together. As she waved back, Beatrice reflected on the strange twist of fate that had brought her to this moment. If Howard Duncan hadn't rejected her for being too tall, she would never have found Mitch, never known this happiness. She often thought about that moment when Mitch had looked up at her and said, perfect. It had been the beginning of everything good in her life, a moment when, for the first time, someone had seen her height as an asset rather than a flaw. Mitch was lifting Matthew down from the pony now, and together they were walking toward the house, their son chattering excitedly between them. Mama, Matthew called. I rode all by myself. I saw. Darling, she replied proudly. You're becoming quite the horseman. Mitch climbed the steps and pressed a kiss to her cheek. He takes after his mother, naturally gifted, he said with a wink. And tall for his age, Beatrice added with a smile. Both children were following in their parents' footsteps in that regard. Of course, Mitch agreed, slipping an arm around her waist. Tall is perfect. As they stood together on the porch, their children playing at their feet, and the Wyoming sunset painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Beatrice knew that this family, this love, this life was indeed perfect. Not because everything always went smoothly. There had been challenges, a difficult first pregnancy, a drought that threatened the ranch, disagreements and misunderstandings as they learned to blend their lives together. But through it all, they had faced each obstacle side by side, equal partners in every sense. Penny for your thoughts, Mitch said, squeezing her waist gently. I was just thinking how grateful I am that Howard Duncan thought I was too tall, she replied honestly. Mitch threw back his head and laughed, the sound still one of her favorite things in the world. I should send that man a thank you note, he agreed. His short-sightedness was my good fortune. And mine, Beatrice added, turning in his arms to face him. Their eyes met at the same level, just as they had that first day in Silver Creek. Mitch's expression softened as he gazed at her, love and admiration still evident after all these years. Have I told you today how much I love you, Mrs. Reed? He asked softly. You have, she confirmed. But I wouldn't mind hearing it again. I love you, he murmured, leaning forward to kiss her gently. More today than yesterday, and not as much as tomorrow. As their children played around them and the sun set on another day in the life they had built together, Beatrice knew that she had found not just a husband who appreciated her height, but a love that measured up to even her tallest dreams. And it was, indeed, perfect.